Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to unpack something really pervasive, but I think often misunderstood.
Mm.
It's European anti-Americanism.
Mm.
And I don't just mean, disagreeing with a president or a specific policy. We're going deeper.
We are. The source material for this deep dive really frames it powerfully right from the start. It talks about visiting a European relative, and their anti-American views weren't some fringe political take. It was just common fare. It was proper etiquette, the kind of thing that brings people together from the right, the left, the center.
It's the ultimate social glue, isn't it? The cultural common ground. So our goal for you today is to really get into the argument that this isn't just criticism.
Yeah.
The source calls it a pedigreed prejudice, a cultural force that's been used for centuries to define what it means to be European, creating this thing the source calls surplus anti-Americanism.
And that's the key term, the feeling that goes way beyond any single policy. And what's wild is how old this is. I mean, sure, recent administrations can pour fuel on the fire, but these fears about Americanness, they're ancient. We can trace them back to the very first European expansions, and then all the way to, say, 20th century figures like Martin Heidegger. He wasn't talking about a government. He saw the U.S. as a soulless, greedy, inauthentic force.
A force that was undermining Europe's whole existence.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's try to pin this down because it's so important for our deep dive. How do we distinguish between, legitimate criticism like disagreeing on the Kyoto Protocol or the Iraq War?
Sure, valid policy debates.
Versus this deeper anti-ism that the source talks about. I mean, where is that line? What's the real thing we're trying to identify here?
Well, the source argues the line gets crossed when the critique stops being about actions and starts hitting 5 specific conditions that put it in the same category as other deeply rooted prejudices.
It moves from the political to the essentialist.
Precisely.
So what are these markers? What's the first one?
First is stereotypization. Those big sweeping statements like, this is what they're all like.
Right, where you just erase 330 million individuals and create one single negative character.
That's it. And second, denigration. Ascribing this collective moral or cultural inferiority. And the key function of that, really, is to establish the moral superiority of the person doing the criticizing.
So we are better because we are not them.
Yes. Then there's omnipotence, the idea that they control everything, the media, the economy, the world.
It's not just that America is powerful, it's that the power is sort of secret and coordinated.
Exactly, which leads right into the fourth point. Conspiracy. The belief that America is trying to destroy other, better ways of life, but surreptitiously and stealthily.
An invisible cultural war.
And the last one is obsession, just the constant, almost clinical preoccupation with this perceived evil.
And here's the part that really stood out to me. The source says, it is not the facts that create the anti-ism, but anti-ism that creates and selects its own facts.
That's the absolute core of it. The prejudice is the filter, not the conclusion. And there's a really interesting psychological twist here. Unlike prejudices against the weak, anti-Americanism gets framed as a kind of noble resistance.
It's a badge of honor.
Oh.
You're not punching down, you're battling an 800-pound gorilla.
A gorilla that's described as, and this is a great quote, threatening, powerful, clumsy, yet also inferior.
That contradiction is everything.
Yeah.
Powerful, but inferior.
It's what gives the contempt its justification. And to really get how that framing got its pedigree, you have to go way back, all the way to the 18th century.
And to this degeneration thesis, this sounds pseudoscientific.
It is. It comes from this hugely influential French naturalist, Comte de Buffon.
Yeah.
His big idea was that the American environment itself, the climate, the land, caused biological degeneracy.
Degeneracy. How did he even try to prove that?
With some pretty bizarre evidence. He claimed indigenous men lacked ardor for the female, which led to infertility. He said the animals were smaller and weaker, and this is my favorite detail. He claimed the dogs in the New World didn't bark.
Wait, hold on. The dogs didn't bark. That can't be a serious observation.
It just shows how determined they were to find fault in everything. And others jumped on this. A Dutch naturalist, Cornelius de Pauw, called the existence of America the worst misfortune.
Wow.
And this established the idea of America as being inherently backward, which is, a pillar of elite European opinion that's still with us today.
And that fear of backwardness then created this deep anxiety among the actual settlers, right? This fear of Indianization.
Absolutely. They were terrified America could somehow infect the old world, that their European identity would just dissolve through invisible assimilation. The anxiety was actually greater toward America than, say, Africa or Asia.
Why is that?
Because the line between a European settler and a native felt dangerously thin, easy to cross,
They were just paranoid about losing their sense of self.
which led to some, frankly, perverse behavior. They'd insist on replacing native foods or architecture, which were way better for the local climate, with European versions, even if it hurt them.
All just to hang on to their Englishness or Frenchness.
That fear of cultural corruption is really the first chapter of all of this.
Which takes us into the 19th century, when you have writers and cultural figures who basically take this idea and make it fashionable for the reading public.
Right, people like Frances Trollope. Her 1832 book, Domestic Manners of the Americans, was a huge hit in Britain.
Why?
Because it confirmed every single negative stereotype. American cultural inferiority and boorish materialism. It just reassured the old world that the U.S. was nothing more than an arrogant parvenu.
A rich kid with no class.
Ooh.
Cultural comfort food for the elites. And then, of course, Charles Dickens comes along. It just turns up the volume.
Dickens was just appalled by America. He mocked the accent. He called the public conceited, ill-mannered, repulsive. He even hated the landscape. He described the Mississippi River as a slimy monster, hideous to behold.
That's the definition of essentialist criticism, isn't it?
Right.
It's not about policy. It's the belief that the place is just inherently, irredeemably vulgar.
Exactly. And this idea gets a really unique spin in Germany, especially with the Karl May Westerns.
The old Shatterhand novels, I know these were huge. How do they fit into this?
Well, Karl May created this incredibly powerful myth. The hero isn't the American settler. The hero is the noble savage, the peaceful American Indian who teams up with the German narrator, Old Shatterhand,
To fight the real villain.
who is the white Yankee brute, the symbol of capitalism, greed, industrialism.
So the millions of Germans reading these books weren't identifying with the people settling the country.
No, not at all. They were identifying with the victims of Yankee aggression. It allowed them to lament the extermination of the Indians and feel this profound sense of moral righteousness.
And the source points out the incredible deflection of guilt there. They could hate the Yankee for the genocide of Native Americans while totally ignoring that huge numbers of German Americans were participating in that very same genocide.
It's a perfect projection, a way to criticize American culture while conveniently ignoring Europe's own complicity.
So fast forward to today, and these historical ideas have sort of morphed into modern code words, like the German term Americanization, Amerikanisierung.
Or American conditions, Amerikanische Verhältnisse.
They become all-purpose swear words, a schimpfwort that you hear across the political spectrum for anything bad or threatening.
And it gets used in the most absurd ways. The source mentions an academic, Helmut Müller-Sievers, who blamed American ignorance on the vastness of American space.
The country is too big, so the people must be ignorant. That's the argument.
Basically, yeah. He said the space is so empty, so disjointed and hostile that it practically cries out for a god as a reason. The geography itself is a cultural failure.
So let's look at how this schimpfwort plays out, starting with language.
Well, there's the trend of translating books as being from the American, not from the English.
Implying it's this separate, uncultured, inferior dialect.
Right. And it's something you almost never see done for, say, Australian or Canadian English. It's an insult reserved for the U.S.
And the same kind of moral judgment happens in moments of tragedy.
Definitely. A horrific school shooting in Europe, like Erfurt in 2002, is immediately labeled American conditions. But a similar tragedy, like the Dunblane massacre in Scotland a few years earlier, was never called Britishization.
The bad thing has to be American.
Yeah.
By definition.
It applies to the legal system, too.
Which is held up as this symbol of American greed.
Widely seen as lousy, run by money-grubbing lawyers. Europeans are just horrified by stories of, kids suing their parents for a new car or something. They see that and just think, Americanization.
The ultimate individualist nightmare. And it's funny because even when America makes progress on something like public health, it still gets framed as a negative.
Look at the smoking debate. Efforts to reduce tobacco use in the U.S. are often mocked in Europe as exaggerated Puritanism, an unwelcome intrusion.
Tobacco dry law.
Yeah, but at the same time, they'll criticize American tolerance for junk food. So both the health campaigns and the junk food are seen as threats to a balanced European way of life.
It really is a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. And I can't think of a better example of that than in European soccer.
Oh, absolutely. For years, the American men's team was just ridiculed as incompetent interlopers. They were bad at the game, and that was that.
But then what happened when they started to get good, like in the 2002 World Cup?
The attitude flipped to genuine alarm. The source quotes an English friend who said, "Now you Yanks are getting good at this too. You were in the process of stealing our game."
They're despised for being bad at it and feared for being good at it.
You see it in the Olympics. Women's softball was abolished, partly because the American women were just too dominant. But men's baseball was also abolished, partly because Major League Baseball was too aloof and wouldn't send its best players.
So the women are too strong, the men are too weak.
And either way, the sports had to go. The result is always the same. And for an individual example, you just have to look at Lance Armstrong.
Right. Before all the doping revelations, when he was winning Tour de France after Tour de France.
The hostility towards him was visceral. The French media constantly called him the ogre American, the American ogre.
An insult, the source says, they just didn't use for other dominant non-American cyclists.
His nationality was a necessary condition for that level of hatred.
This brings us to a really troubling connection that the sources explore. The link between this anti-Americanism and anti-Semitism.
Yeah, this is a difficult but crucial part of the analysis. Because anti-Americanism is aimed at a powerful global entity, it can become a kind of modern, acceptable container for much older prejudices.
Equating American power with Jewish influence.
Yes, the idea of America as the Jew among nations, representing rootless capitalism, modernity, shadowy power.
And the examples of this are just chilling.
They are. Like the protester at Davos wearing a Donald Rumsfeld mask and a yellow Star of David labeled sheriff dancing around a golden calf. The symbolism is just horribly blatant.
Or that German Union magazine cover.
IG Metal. It showed a mosquito in an Uncle Sam hat with a huge nose and a gold tooth labeled U.S. companies in Germany, the bloodsuckers. It's a direct fusion of classic anti-Semitic and anti-American cartoons.
And for Germany specifically, the source claims anti-Americanism plays this unique psychological role.
It's tied to this concept, Schuld auf Antisemitismus. It's a mouthful, but it means anti-Semitism as a defense against guilt.
How does that work?
By constantly pointing to America's historical crimes, its Holocaust against the Native Americans, Germans can achieve a sense of moral righteousness.
It flips the script.
Exactly. It turns the tables on the country, often coded as being run by those critical East Coast intellectuals that reminds them of their own Nazi past. It's a very powerful psychological shield.
So if it's this deeply rooted, what is its actual political function today? The source argues this has very little to do with the real America.
And everything to do with Europe's own project.
Its own identity.
Precisely. Anti-Americanism is an emotional, potent, and very real aspect of European identity formation, especially after the Cold War and then 9/11 in Iraq, which brought the elite and the public opinion together on this.
It provides a common enemy for a very diverse continent.
And it serves a very practical, if cynical, purpose. By equating globalization with Americanization, they achieve two things.
Okay.
One, they clear their own conscience. They don't have to think about the role their own companies play in capitalism's problems. And two, it gives European global players an advantage because they're not seen as the bogeymen. America takes all the heat.
So anti-Americanism ends up being this politically defining credo. It's the one thing everyone can agree on, even when they're fighting about the future of Europe itself.
It is the great unifier. The conclusion is pretty stark, really. This isn't some passing mood that depends on who's in the White House. It's a structural force that's essential for a distinct European identity.
So we've done the deep dive. We've seen this thing transform from a strange, scholarly critique into this massive, multi-layered prejudice, a cultural shimfort that echoes through centuries of writing.
And we've established the core argument. It's not really about American reality. It's about European necessity,
Right.
the need to define us against them.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. The classic critique has always been that America is lacking something: tradition, depth, manners. So if this whole sentiment is really about European self-definition, what happens if America actually changes? What if the U.S. were to suddenly embrace everything Europeans champion, ratify Kyoto, ban the death penalty, adopt strict gun laws? Would that shared anti-American identities just melt away?
Or would they just find a new set of American flaws, their excessive niceness maybe, or their new obsessive health consciousness to despise, just to keep that sense of identity alive?
Is the bogeyman just too necessary to let go of? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.